Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host. The Yameen of Revolution, the fall of the U.S. Empire. It's the end of the white supremacists. Before we get into that, y'all be sure to wipe y'all feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we got to get into the fall of the U.S. Empire. Anytime the white supremacists humiliated, it's a great day for me.
If you know the story of Vinny the Chin, Gigante, the Genovese crime boss, he was mad as a hatter, walking down the road in his striped pajamas, in his bathrobe, in his slippers, coming out naked into the street, urinating publicly, looking for all the world like a madman. But all the time, he was actually building the Genovese family into a mighty powerhouse of the mafia in New York. I got to thinking of the similarities between Vinny the Chin and Donny Gigante Trump. And if you think about it, it's not all that far-fetched, not any more far-fetched that the host of The Apprentice should end up running the United States and plunging the world into World War III. It's not that far-fetched that Trump is laying the groundwork for an insanity plea if and when he leaves office and if and when he faces prosecution for multifarious crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes against the American people, crimes against the American Constitution. In fact, Donald Trump is a far, far bigger criminal than Vinny the Chin Gigante ever was. Vinny the Chin didn't succeed in his madness plea in the end, going down in the 1990s into Sing Sing or wherever they put these chaps these days.
Like Trump probably fake his death. His children ought to go to prison. A lot of these people finna go to prison. That's real talk. And we're gonna push to make sure the Democrats lock their ass up. A lot of Democrats who supported the U.S. because y'all know y'all defenseless right now, right? Y'all know if Russia or China or North, if they really want to kick your ass right now here in the U.S., they can do it. Only thing we could do is blow up the whole world with our nuclear weapons. We can't defend ourselves anymore. It's a fact. Trump has wasted every last piece of defense weapon fighting Iran. That's a fact. It's out, and he's screaming treason. He said somebody going to prison. Yeah, them. But the U.S. is defenseless. That's the main point that we're gonna be coming to understanding. They took all your money. Now, if you really got into some funk with a country, you can't win. You can't really fight them. All of us have to go give our lives just to surrender, because you wasted all of your air defense. Just listen to me. All of your air defense systems trying to stop Iran, and you still didn't stop them. Meaning, if China or North Korea or Russia just start sending missiles towards the U.S. right now, that'll be our ass, and that's a fact.
Days. But Donald Trump won't get away with it either. Just this very day, he put out a social media post hailing the defection from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party of Alan Dershowitz, Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer. And when you're in the trouble that Donald Trump is already in, it seems like he has some kind of death wish. Certainly his erstwhile friends, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, and above all, primus inter pares, Tucker Carlson, this very evening at 11 o'clock, right after this show, will be going live on the Tucker Carlson network, TCN, to launch the third party, launch the third way, launch the anti-war decent money. No more foreign donors, no more corruption. Phenomenon that might just take U.S. politics by storm in the next couple of years. After all, who the Democrats going to put up against Tucker?
It's a new political day, and that's why we got to make sure politics is a way of life, and we live it, breathe it, eat it to help ourselves, be able to fund ourselves, be able to get our piece of the pie here in America. And we can't listen to the boule or our elected black leaders because they led us astray. They also back this war in Ukraine, which now we can't defend ourselves. We can't listen to any Congressional Black Caucus member. They also back the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, which we wasted a lot of weapons, and Russia's stronger than ever. We don't want to listen to none of them. We have to have new leaders. We have to elect new leaders because the whites is already overthrowing their leaders. Trump and all those. Oh, that's what Tucker Carlson and all them. They're finna go to have a civil war, getting rid of everybody who gave Israel their money. That's a fact. That's what's going on that side. We have to do the same damn thing on our side. Every last one of them bastards who sold us out to Israel, they can't represent us no more. That's just a fact, bro. You gotta be
Tucker Carlson. Who are the Republicans going to put up against Tucker Carlson? Oozing charisma in spades, a grasp of world affairs that no official of the Trump administration can even approach remotely. Tucker Carlson, after Donald Trump, the best known man in America. After JFK, the smoothest, coolest, most handsome presidential candidate in 60 years or more in American politics. It's an exciting development. And I'm not just saying that because Tucker Carlson thinks I should be the Prime Minister of Britain, but I think Tucker Carlson should be the President of the United States. If only it could both come true, how the world would be different. I'm mentioning all this mental health stuff because
Tucker was a bigot, like all of the bigots that never try to come up against us. But like my daddy taught me, politics is not zero-sum game. It's give and take. That's one thing we have to realize. It's give and it's take, you know. But the one thing I can respect Tucker is going against Israel. And he said that we, the real Americans, the foundation of Black Americans. Never forget that episode came out that he told all of the blacks around the world that they was getting into the FBA. He said he respect FBA. He said those are real Americans. Those are the real Americans. Tucker Carlson said that.
It seems to me that Donald Trump has a very wide seam of schizophrenia running through him. And when we say, when will he make his minds up, we mean it, because from hour to hour, perhaps depending on whether the stock market is open or not, perhaps depending on what he has bet on the oil markets or on the stock market, the corruption has been estimated by experts in Iran as having been worth some $9 billion fraudulently made on the oil markets, on the stock markets, by manipulating the prices of both by false declarations of developments in the Persian Gulf War. But it seems that the neighbors have taken over the reins. It seems that Donald Trump, without interceptors, without warships that work, without the means of affecting the course of events, has left to the neighbors in the Gulf the job of finally solving the conundrum of the Straits of Hormuz.
Imagine Trump was on TV yesterday saying Iran better accept that deal or else. The whole world is laughing because now they know what's going on. The deal is between Iran and Oman, and Iran is telling Oman they're going to accept what Iran is saying. So Trump is saying Iran better accept their own deal and take everything that they deserve to take or else. That's crazy, bro. And that's what you finna find out. He's saying, Iran, you better take your deal that you demanded from the beginning. U.S. surrender, bro.
Trump wants them
Trump
open.
is telling Iran, please stop asking for more. You already defeated us. Just take everything.
You see. But they were open before Trump's sneak attack, his day of infamy, when he massacred in the same day, not just the octogenarian leader of Iran, but more than 180 little girls
That was-
sitting at their desks in a school in Minab. The manipulation, the corruption scarcely needs stating anymore. I mean, even Barron Trump, who's still at school, has become a multi-millionaire, listening in the drawing room as teenage children do, and then sneaking off and making a purchase or three of stocks and shares based on what he's just heard his father talking about. I mean, there have been a lot of corrupt American presidents, but there has never been an era of corruption like this, an era of madness like this. 1 minute, Trump is going to end Persian civilization, 5,600 years old. You hear that number, Donnie? 5,600 years old. He's going to blow it up. He's going to destroy everything. He's going to commit multiple war crimes. He's going to destroy water, electricity. He's going to destroy civilian bridges. He's going to commit every war crime that was the cause of multiple hangings
That was a bluff.
of the war criminals concerned at the Nuremberg Tribunal in 1945.
Yeah,
But
that's
hey,
what happened to
who even remembers that stuff? Tokyo
That's
Tribunal.
why Marco Rubio is trying to tear down the International Criminal Court right now, so they all won't be tried and hanged like the Nazis. People better pay attention. That's why they're trying to tear down the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, was put together because of the Nazis. So why is it right now Trump and Marco Rubio is tearing it down and trying to defund it? Because they know what awaits them, bro.
Tribunals, even less so. But the signs are, according to Iran, 20 minutes before I came on air, they have reached agreement with their neighbors about what channel tankers and other boats will go into the Straits of Hormuz and which channels they will exit it from. And
Iran.
while there'll be no tolls as such, it seems there will be fees. A rose, by any other name, would still smell as sweet after all. So it's a big, big triumph for Iran. As I was just saying on Sunday, Trump, who claimed he'd won this war at least 47 times, can now be said with...
They've been lying to the Americans from the beginning. They keep saying the Strait of Hormuz and keep saying international waters, international waters. There are no international waters between Oman and Iran. That's a lie. The Iranians just never have tried to do what they're doing right now. The U.S. fucked up. From the U.S. coastline to 12.5 miles to the ocean, the U.S. only got 12.5 miles of our coastline. Then when you get past that, that's called international water. A lot of people don't know that. So 12.5 miles from our coastline, that's free for anybody to be roaming around there. 12.5 miles from Iran, 12.5 miles from Oman, there is no waters in the middle. They're calling these people waters international waters. They've been doing that shit forever, bullying these people. And Iran been really going along with it. That's over with. There are no international waters between Iran and Oman. The U.S. is wrong for keep saying that shit. No reporters want to check them. That's over with. They should have never did that shit. That shit now belongs to Iran.
Certainty to have finally lost it. Not least because the head of the U.S. Navy told everybody that his ships could not protect Israel any further. They had no missiles. They had no interceptors. And these missiles, these interceptors take 2 to 3 years on the production line. So when you can't protect Israel and you're the United States government, which seems to...
That supposed to be all over the news. Some news stations barely reported on it, but they talking about this all over the world. The head of the U.S. military told Trump, told Congress, told the Senate, we can no longer defend the U.S. and Israel. That's over with. Y'all have to choose one. Do you want us to defend the U.S. or do you want us to defend Israel? We can't do both anymore. That's a fact. That's what the army told Trump. What do you want us to do, bro? Because the U.S. ass is gone or Israel, but somebody got to go. That's a fact.
To exist only for the protection of Israel, you can say that you have definitely lost the war. And the people of America are cheering accordingly. In Michigan last night, an Arab American, an anti-Israeli, a pro-Palestine, pro-Lebanon candidate swept the boards in the Democratic primary for the Democratic nomination for the Senate race in Michigan. He accepted precisely $0 from the Israel lobby. The woman incumbent that he defeated accepted $36 million from the Israel lobby. In fact, there's a long list now of people who never took a penny from AIPAC and who are defeating incumbents, in many cases, who have taken a king's ransom from AIPAC and other Israel lobby organizations. This is a very profound change. It should not be underestimated. AIPAC has become an albatross around the neck of the political class and the Democratic Party in particular. I don't know who the Democrats will pick to put up against Tucker Carlson, but I'll tell you this, it'll have to be someone who's pretty resoundingly hostile to Netanyahu, to Israel and its crimes. That's just now a matter of simple political arithmetic. That is an enormous change. So hats off to everyone in America who played any part at all in bringing about that change. It's a pity that 1 million Palestinians had to leave their guts in the sand of the Gaza Strip in order to finally tip the balance. But the war in Ukraine goes from bad to worse for Donald Trump-led NATO. Now, Trump keeps saying that he wants to bring about an end to the Ukraine.
They're not paying attention to. Zelensky is crying that they don't have no interceptors. Pay attention. They don't have no interceptors in the Middle East. Anything Iran shoot at, it's going to hit because we ran out. Zelensky's crying on TV last night. Russia's hitting everything they want to hit in the capital because they don't have no interceptors. They can't defend themselves. The U.S. military, none of them can defend themselves on any battlefield anymore. But they say they're the strongest military power. Man, this is the fall of the U.S. empire. The DEI, white supremacist army, that's who was fighting this war. They fired all the black generals, so this is on them. They don't want to tell the whole world that it's over for them. If Russia really wants to handle them rough, Putin will do whatever the fuck he wants to do with the U.S. right now because they can't defend themselves.
Ukraine war?
He's not going to do it. He's just going to defeat them on the battlefield. He's not going to just overly, he ain't going to come over here and do it because then the U.S. would nuke him. He's going to do it in Europe, though. That's a fact.
But it never ends. He keeps saying that he is not supplying any more weapons to the thief of Kiev, many of which end up in Africa or in the hands of organized crime, cartels, who knows, maybe even the Genovese family themselves. But he keeps selling it to NATO, and he doesn't know, you see, what they do with it thereafter. I mean, that's as implausible as Vinny the Chin's defense turned out to be in the 1990s. He knows full well that the weapons he's selling to NATO, he is NATO. He's the leader of NATO. They go to murder children on beaches in Krasnodar, as happened earlier this week. We saw it. On television, we saw it. Not on your television, because you're banned from seeing the truth on your television, but on my television, I watched it multiple times. I saw the swimmers in the sea. I was imagining a kind of Jaws theme to it because I knew what was coming next. The people were in the water. The families were on the beaches. The children were frolicking. It was a beautiful summer's day, and bang! A Ukrainian rocket murdered them. I say a Ukrainian rocket, but of course, it was a NATO rocket. It was a rocket made either in the United States or in Italy or in the United Kingdom or in Germany or France. We killed those children on the beach in the Krasnodar region earlier this week. We did it. Not Zelensky. He might have pulled the trigger, although only might. There are so many mercenaries now in there. It's perfectly possible that we are actually pulling the triggers, that our satellites are identifying which child exactly are we going to slaughter, the one with the beach ball or the one on the water slide? Which one are we going to murder? Perfectly possible. And then they go home to their beds as Mr. James Bond incarnate and think that they've done a good day's work. Well, if you're a mass murderer, then yeah, you did a good day's work. Trump keeps saying he wants to end the war, but he won't tell Elon Musk, who sits next to him on the Air Force One, who is on the phone to him every other day, if not every day. He's never told them to switch off the Starlink, without which these kinds of murders could not take place. He says he wants to end the war, but he licensed this day Patriot missile production to Ukraine, having earlier said that he would not. He said, how's this for schizophrenia? He turned down Zelensky's request for more Patriots because he needed them for Israel. But on the same day, he licensed Zelensky to manufacture his own Patriots. Of course, that'll probably never happen. The scale of the bombardment now from Russia of Kiev and its surrounding areas is so massive. It's difficult to see Zelensky himself emerging unscathed by the weekend or the weekend after that. The idea that Russia is going to allow a factory somewhere to start manufacturing Patriots, well, right at this moment, Ukraine appears to have no missile defense at all. Now, I'm no general. I was only a boy soldier.
Come on now.
A lance bombardier, but even I know if your opponent has no missile defense, that's probably the moment to pile on the missile bombardment. And not just...
Oh, that's what the U.S. is facing in their two main wars. They can't defend themselves. They can't defend themselves in the Middle East. They begging for peace. And they can't defend themselves in Europe against Russia right now. They begging for peace. The U.S. is fucked. They're going to want to steal all our money behind this to say they got to ramp up more weapons. We can look, to make more advanced weapons, you need rare earth minerals. Wait a minute. I could have sworn China had all them and they told the U.S. to go fuck yourself. Oh, they did. The U.S. is fucked.
On Kiev. But the widening war aims of Russia are clearly visible to me. They're clearly visible in the naval blockade in the Black Sea, which has now effectively rendered Ukraine a landlocked country. Clearly visible in the increased activity in and around the Russian city of Odessa, which, as I've been saying since the beginning of this conflict, it will be very difficult for the Russians to leave Odessa, built by Catherine the Great, to Zelensky or his successors. But I must spend a couple of minutes talking about this new development of Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson's a friend of mine. Let me make that declaration of interest right away. But he's the biggest broadcaster on the planet. Number one, numero uno, the number one honcho. He has name recognition, face recognition, a global reach that no other American presidential candidate has ever had. Now, I know that there are others in his band. Thomas Massey, outstanding congressman. Marjorie Taylor Greene, former outstanding American congresswoman. There are others like Joe Kent, who've resigned from the...
Now, when they're talking about Tucker Carlson running for president, now I'm just going to say this. Now, to tell y'all, we know about his racist past. My pops told me politics is not a zero-sum game. Good thing he got going for him, his stance against the Zionist Israel, his saying the foundational Black Americans are the real Americans. Never forget that point that he said that. All right? All right, because he definitely finna run. And Republicans got a serious problem on their goddamn hands. The Democrats got one on their hands too, because anybody going for Israel, they're not finna be, the Democratic primaries, they showing them that right now. The people rising up, they tired of that shit, bro.
Trump administration, albeit belatedly, who are papabile, they are potential leaders in the future in American politics. But I venture to suggest that a ticket with Tucker Carlson at the head of it might prove unstoppable in the next presidential election, which will be fought between two severely diminished parties. The Republicans and the Democrats are not just the same thing, not just two cheeks of the same arse. It's an arse that has sagged so much it's hanging down below the knees. It is identified as McConnell. It is identified as Schumer. It is identified as Pelosi. It is identified with the necrophiliacs of American politics who continue on life support to support individuals who are so discredited that they were, as it were, having literally to be kept alive even when they are dead. It'll be toothy Gavin Newsom or laughing Kamala Harris against, far from laughing, in fact, decidedly glum, J.D. Vance or the poison dwarf Marco Rubio. With that lineup, I tell you, Tucker Carlson will drive a coach and horses through them and all the way to victory. It's up to you in the United States. I hope you take the chance. Coming up,
Donald Trump was having a meltdown at 12:40 a.m. as Iran issued another fatal warning. Donald Trump posting on social media at 12:40 a.m. that he will be hunting down people he says are involved in treason by going to the press to say that the United States is out of Patriot interceptors, THAAD interceptors, ATACMS, and Navy destroyers and other.
He mad because they told the truth. And now he said he's going to charge him with treason. Damn, they telling the truth. So you can't defend yourself anymore. Oh, shit.
Their critical military equipment such that Donald Trump is unable to escalate his catastrophic and unlawful war in Iran. Yes. Donald Trump at 12:40 a.m. posting, the U.S. has massive amounts of munitions, especially of certain types, Yes, very specific of certain types. Additionally, large amounts are being manufactured and shipped to the United States as needed. Shipped to the United States? Didn't you say you brought all of the manufacturing back in the United States? Oh, so we need it from other countries? Okay, go on. Defense companies are building the largest number of plants and factories in our country's history. Well, your sentence before that seems to contradict that. Oh, wait a minute. You lie about everything. And he goes on to say the leakers, and he puts that in quotes, of these treasonous statements are being hunted down. Long-term jail sentences will be sought. DJT. Just think about it. The president of the United States at 12:40 a.m. after threatening to blow the effing S out of Iran and then backing down because the United States ran out of weapons, now is saying he will be hunting down the leakers because they're involved in treason when Donald Trump and Netanyahu got us into this catastrophic and unlawful war 6 months ago that Donald Trump said was going to end in days. And then Donald Trump proceeded to lie every day and claim he's having fake negotiations with Iran, which was utterly humiliating. Meanwhile, Iran's deputy foreign minister issuing the warning and saying the following: the United States is basically begging us, is what Iran's foreign minister Garbabadi said. The United States sent a message requesting negotiations and a resolution of issues approximately 4 or 5 days after the start of the new round of conflict. Any agreement regarding the Strait of Hormuz should only be between Iran and Oman. We will not accept any foreign interference in the Strait of Hormuz. With the implementation of the new agreement, existing temporary routes in the Strait of Hormuz will be closed. A significant portion of the routes for ships entering and exiting Iranian territorial waters will pass through. So Iran is working out this deal with Oman, where Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. Iran can toll in the Strait of Hormuz. And Donald Trump wants to try to take credit for the Iranian deal with Oman. And Iran is saying, if you try to send your tankers through the route that we don't approve, we're not involved in a ceasefire with you, Donald. We will not hesitate to shoot your tankers. And indeed, Iran has been shooting tankers in the Strait of Hormuz as recently as the past 12 hours. The Houthis in Yemen have been shooting at Saudi tankers and other tankers that have not been following its instructions in the Bab el-Mandab Strait in the Red Sea. I mean, just take a look at what went down again in the past 12 hours. The UK MTO, the UK Maritime Organization, received a report about a tanker getting struck right by Oman in that southern route where the U.S. and CENTCOM encourage tankers to go, where Iran basically blows up all of the tankers that don't follow the IRGC instructions. A tanker was just hit there. Let's go take a look at the Bab el-Mandab Strait, shall we? Because there you have the Houthis making the following announcement. The Houthis announced that they targeted the Saudi oil tanker Wafa with an undisclosed number of missiles in the northern Red Sea off the coast of Yanbu, marking the 8th Saudi Arabian oil tanker targeted and the total number of Saudi tankers diverted since July 22nd to the 29th. The statement is significant because it explicitly expands the Houthis' targeting to include Saudi tankers operating in the northern Red Sea. Let's take a look. Are there any other UK MTO notices? Indeed, there are additional ones. The UK MTO, United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, has issued an advisory after yet another attack, this time by Mukah in Yemen as well, and then by Aden, Yemen, another Houthi strike right there. Strike after strike after strike. And meanwhile, we're also learning how Iran warned Gulf states that any new U.S. attack on its territory would trigger massive retaliation against the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure across the region, according to 5 sources that spoke to Reuters. As Tehran says, we know the United States is out of interceptors, the THAAD and the Patriots, the PAC-3s. We know that you're out of Navy destroyer SM-2, SM-3, SM-6 anti-ballistics. We know that. I mean, we've heard what General Grinkowicz, the U.S. NATO's allied commander in Europe, has to say. We know you're out. we are able to strike the U.S. bases with impunity, is what Iran says. We can see through the satellite footage that the U.S. has abandoned its bases in the region. And so Iran says, we will continue to escalate these costs until you submit. Until you ensure that we have control of the Strait of Hormuz, we're not acknowledging your fake deals, right? I mean, you had Treasury Secretary Bessent the other day saying, we're doing a deal in 2 or 3 days. Trust me, the deal's about to be done. We're going to announce it. And it's just more market manipulation from Bessent. Meanwhile, Iran's Assembly of Experts, that's the main organization in Iran that picks the Ayatollah and supervises the Ayatollah. The Iran Assembly of Experts said the following: the wise, insightful, hopeful, and dignified messages of the leader of the revolution provides direction and guidance for the honorable people of Iran and the Islamic nation, and must remain at the forefront of the country's official considerations. Trusting the arrogant U.S. government is nothing more than a mirage. Placing hope in reaching an understanding or agreement with this bullying regime will lead nowhere. Any action aimed at securing the nation's rights must be carried out within the framework of the leader's view, guidance, and strategic decisions. Then you've got Donald Trump going on his social media platform, posting only Trump with one of the bronze statues that is now gilded gold. And Trump says, so beautiful, DC is better than ever. Tender, loving care. More from Iran's deputy minister, Garbabadi. He talks about how specifically the route will work in the Strait of Hormuz. A significant portion of the ship's entry and exit routes will pass through Iranian territorial waters. According to the understanding reached with Oman, the northern route, which was established near Lark Island, and the southern route, which is in Omani internal waters, will be closed, as these were completely temporary routes. If this new understanding that is being formed between Iran and Oman, with those requirements met, enters the implementation phase, this new route will be implemented for the passage of ships. A significant part of this new route is located in Iranian territorial waters, and part of it is in Omani territorial waters. That is, it is designed in such a way that commercial ships will always pass through Iranian territorial waters on both the way in and out. In other words, Iran is saying, we control the Strait of Hormuz. And if you try to move tankers, we're not afraid. And we've seen these multiple strikes by Iran continuing to hit tankers. The other day, Iran struck a U.S. base in Kuwait. The other day, we believe, the Houthis striking in Dubai, although right now the UAE says, it was just a random factory explosion. It wasn't actually, any strikes. And so Iran has not backed down, and Iran also sees what Donald Trump is doing. I mean, latest story from the New York Times, just the amount of money Donald Trump continues to waste as he bankrupts our military. So not only are we running out of the THAAD and the Patriot interceptors and the SM-2, SM-3, SM-6 anti-ballistics on those Navy destroyers, but Trump has now spent close to $300 billion or $275 billion on a new class of warships called the Trump class of warships, which now cost 50% more than expected. And that's probably lowballing it as well. It'll probably be significantly more than that. And so Trump said that he liked the way the ships looked right around between World War I and World War II. And he doesn't like our stealth ships. He doesn't like aircraft carriers, and he doesn't like submarines. He wants to build battleships because he likes the way battleships work. So he wants nuclear battleships. And that we are now spending $300 billion of our taxpayer dollars to build Trump battleships. I kid you not. That's what these MAGA Republicans approved as well with their disastrous budgets. And guess what? In today's day of warfare, where you have unmanned submersives, where you have FPV drones, where you have these Shahed-style drones, and the variations of that are used in the United States and Ukraine and elsewhere, drone warfare is the way of the future. And so why would you be building a battleship that it just takes a few unmanned submersives to destroy at this point? It's just a waste of money, but that's who Donald Trump is. Also, Iran is watching as, you hear stories of Trump's incompetence almost leading to him being killed the other day. That's right. Trump almost got killed the other day in a helicopter crash. A helicopter carrying Donald Trump flew right near a passenger jet in Washington airspace. Remember how at the beginning of the Trump regime, there was the horrific plane crash into the helicopter? Well, Marine One, the helicopter that ferries Donald Trump, came less than a mile. It was actually 0.8 miles of an Envoy air flight on Tuesday, raising concerns about air traffic control in the congested area. Marine One was unable to get in touch with air traffic control at the local airport, and the planes came within 0.8 miles. For all the pilots out there, you know that the loss of separation warning is really dangerous at 1.5 miles in lateral distance, especially the speed at which planes go and the distance it can go in a very short period of time. So being 0.8 miles away was actually a very, very close call. And Iran's just watching the level of incompetence. They're like, he's afraid we're going to kill him. Dude's going to kill himself based on his own incompetence at this point. A few other things I want to point out, and I'll be doing other videos on this. A new Washington Post article talks about how Trump and Hegseth clashed at that Camp David meeting over the lack of interceptors and the Patriot interceptors, the THAAD interceptors, and the anti-ballistics on the Navy destroyers, and the ATACMS and those HIMARS that have been used. And so this is one of the areas that Donald Trump is freaking out over, that this information has gone out. And Iran knows we're out of weapons. That's why Trump's like, we're hunting you down. We're hunting you down. And so at the Camp David meeting, according to the story, Donald Trump was yelling at Hegseth, we thought you had the interceptor situation under control. Why is Dan Kane the chairman of the Joint Chiefs? And generals like General Grinkowicz and others saying that we don't have weapons. We're out of weapons. We're out of interceptors. And Hegseth apparently blamed Stephen Feinberg, his deputy. He was like, it's Feinberg's fault. He did it. He did it. And then the whole Trump regime's like, this is fake news. Washington Post is lying. There's nothing true about this at all. There's nothing true about this at all. Okay. Now, as Donald Trump continues to panic late at night, as Iran issues the fatal warning that it will control the Strait of Hormuz and that it will not tolerate any U.S. Involvement in the Strait of Hormuz at all. And Iran made good on it. It struck multiple tankers. I know this isn't being reported, and all that gets reported in the U.S. is the market manipulation of Bessent. Oh, we're about to make a deal. We're about to make all those lies that manipulated the market at the beginning of this week. But the reality is that the war's going on, and we're getting all this disinformation in the United States, and tankers are being hit, and Iran is striking our bases because we invaded them. The United States and Israel invaded them, and Netanyahu. So, of course, they're going to defend themselves. And so while all of that's going on, Nikki Haley surfaced. Nikki Haley posted the following. U.S. national debt nears $40 trillion, hits record 124% of GDP. U.S. public debt has climbed to a record $39.8 trillion, leaving it just $200 billion shy of the historic $40 trillion mark. And then she says, in the next 2 weeks, our country will hit $40 trillion in debt. It's one of the biggest problems facing young Americans right now. Yet politicians in Washington and around the country aren't even discussing it. We're leaving an entire generation broke. We're discussing it. You know who's not discussing it? Your cult, Nikki Haley, your sicko MAGA cult. You know why? Because your Fuhrer, Donald Trump, is responsible for close to 40% of that debt. Didn't you all say that Doge was going to stop this and Project 2025 was going to stop all of this? No, y'all are not fiscal conservatives. You're not fiscal hawks. You are the most reckless, most irresponsible individuals handling money and debt. You're the least conservative. That term is BS. It has no meaning. You're the least fiscally responsible people. Your party, Trump, Bush, Reagan, y'all are the people who are caused all of this debt. It's actually been Democratic presidents who have lowered it. That's an objective damn fact right there. But MAGA Republicans just care about manipulating the market, making their rich friends richer. And we get this great story from the Wall Street Journal, Philip Wegman and Nick Tamaris. Scoop: Trump speaks repeatedly with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Kevin.
Revolutionary salute to our family. Tethers, Dookie outside for the two Jews to the war chest. Revolution is way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, soldier. Salute.
Warsh over the phone. Since Warsh became chairman of the Federal Reserve, maintaining a line of communication between the president and a central bank chief that has little recent precedent, how about has no precedent at all? Trump now sees Warsh as a valued outside economic advisor. This is some third world banana republic stuff right here. Their continued conversations are a sharp departure from how Fed Chairman Jerome Powell handled Trump and former President Biden. Yeah, because it's supposed to be independent. It's supposed to be independent. That's why. The relationship is more similar to that of Clinton and Greenspan. No, it's not. No, it's not. This is more similar to like Javier Milei. This is more similar to like Bukele. It's more similar to how Orban did things. That's not what the markets want to see here in the United States. Let me be that's not, for long-term sustainability. They're just going to manipulate the markets in the short term and then screw over all the future generations with this abhorrent behavior. Anyway, we'll keep you posted every step of the way. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers. Thank you for watching, everybody.
war that the United States launched against Iran has become a complete disaster. And more evidence is coming out demonstrating that the US government does not have a plan and has no way out of this totally unnecessary crisis that it created. Today, I'm going to be analyzing several reports that reflect how chaotic the situation is in Washington. But this one really takes the cake. CNN published a report this August titled, U.S. Military Asks Troops for Creative and Unconventional Ideas to Punish Iran. So when I say that the Donald Trump administration has no plan for this war, I'm not exaggerating. The Pentagon is literally brainstorming ideas with military analysts. I'm reading here from this report, quote, the request from a senior officer at the U.S. military command carrying out President Donald Trump's war with Iran came in an email. We need ideas. Quote, we are looking for new creative and unconventional ways to pressure and punish Iran, end quote. An officer in U.S. Central Command's intelligence branch wrote in a message sent to a broad group of military analysts, end quote. And this comes after U.S. government officials have leaked similar stories to the press, revealing, for instance, that Trump is literally yelling at top staff members because there is no plan for this war. He has no idea what to do. Because the undeniable reality is that the United States lost this war. Critics of the war, like us here at Geopolitical Economy Report, we have been saying for months now, the U.S. obviously lost. And it's now being widely acknowledged in mainstream Western media outlets. In fact, the New York Times published an article this August titled, In Iran, the U.S. appears headed for a strategic defeat, allies fear. I'll come back to this report in a few minutes here. There have been many similar articles published recently. Another example is Foreign Policy Magazine published an article advising Trump on how to end the Iran war. This was written by think tankers in Washington who work at a major think tank funded by the U.S. government. And they said that, quote, Trump needs to learn the diplomatic art of losing well, acknowledging that he lost, the US lost. Moreover, the Financial Times is now reporting on the fact that Iran is setting the terms in this war. The US started this war of aggression, but Iran is winning, and it's Iran that has the leverage, not the US. I'm going to come back to these reports in a few minutes here and analyze them in further detail. But first, I want to talk about the narrative coming from the White House, because if you listen to what Trump is saying, it's like he lives on another planet. Trump is totally out of touch with reality. And every few days, he goes on his website, Truth Social, and he announces some new policy on Iran. And he's constantly flip-flopping. He's constantly having a change of heart. One day he says that the war is ending and Iran supposedly agreed to a deal. And then literally the next day, he threatens to destroy Iran. This is what Trump posted on the 1st of August. He said, quote, the USA is locked and loaded and ready to go against the Islamic Republic of Iran at levels of military terror, strength, and power not seen since World War II, end quote. Now, I have to say, this is a very revealing admission. He acknowledged that the US military is engaged in terror, like, for instance, bombing schools in Iran. Don't forget how the US government started this war in Iran by bombing schools full of children in Iran, including a triple tap strike on a school largely for young girls. And it was later reported that one of the reasons that the US targeted the school is because many of the students there were children of military officers. So the US was intentionally targeting the family members, the children of Iranian military officers. And this is why the US carried out a triple tap strike, because it assumed that some of the Iranian military officers would go look for their children who were just bombed by the US, and then the US would also bomb them. So when Trump goes out and tweets admitting that the US military is engaged in, quote, terror, strength, and power not seen since World War II, end quote, it's actually quite accurate. His tactics are quite similar to the tactics of the Third Reich. This is exactly what the US military has been doing, intentionally bombing civilians and civilian infrastructure, including children in Iran. But that point aside, which is, of course, is extremely important, the message that Trump is conveying here in this tweet is that the US is prepared once again to restart the war. But he says that the US has been asked supposedly by Iran and other Middle Eastern countries to hold off any attacks. And then Trump claimed that supposedly Washington and Tehran are carrying out negotiations, and supposedly they are on the verge of a deal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. This strait is the most important oil transit choke point on Earth. Before the US started this war, 20% of the global oil supply was flowing through the Strait of Hormuz on a daily basis. In response to the US war of aggression, Iran shut down the strait. However, the Iranian government has said that Trump's claims that they're negotiating and have come to a deal, that is all false. It is simply not true. So Trump just goes out there and he just lies blatantly and claims every few days that supposedly there's a new deal and they're going to end the war. And this comes right after the US bombs Iran and threatens Iran. Really, I'm not exaggerating when I say that every few days, his rhetoric completely changes. He does a 180 constantly. And this is simply a reflection of the fact that the US has no plan and no way to actually end this war because the US lost, and Trump refuses to acknowledge that. This is why every week or two, Trump goes out there and he claims yet again that this is the last chance for Iran. How many times can you say this is the last chance when your threats become meaningless? Trump has already said this before. He's constantly telling Iran, make a deal that benefits the US. Surrender your sovereignty. Give up the Strait of Hormuz. Give up your nuclear program. Give up all of your missiles. abandon your independent foreign policy, and become a US puppet. These are the demands that the US is making. Obviously, Iran is not going to make any of these concessions when Iran is winning the war and Iran has the leverage. So Trump goes out there and wags his finger at Iran, threatening Tehran, saying, this is your last chance for a deal. And what is Iran doing? It's calling Trump's bluff. So let's try to understand what's actually happening here. Because if you just follow Trump's tweets, you'd be completely confused, rightfully, because he's constantly changing his rhetoric about what's happening every few days. What is actually happening, as we'll show with evidence today, is that the US and its allies are desperately looking for some kind of off-ramp. And it has now been reported that one of the reasons that Trump called off these massive strikes on Iran that he threatened to destroy Iran's electrical infrastructure and oil infrastructure. One of the reasons for calling that off is because major US allies in the so-called Middle East, in West Asia, were very concerned. In particular, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE all called Trump and told him to de-escalate, not to escalate. This was also reported by the US news website Axios, which is very closely linked to US intelligence agencies and Israeli intelligence agencies. And spies for those agencies are often leaking stories to Axios. And they reported that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, personally asked Trump to pause these strikes because Saudi Arabia is concerned about retaliation. And this makes perfect sense, because the reality is that Iran has the ability to continue escalating and hitting strategic infrastructure in the neighboring countries in the Persian Gulf. In particular, for these Persian Gulf monarchies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Bahrain, etc., most of them do not have access to fresh water, so they get more than 90% of their drinking water from desalination plants to remove salt from salt water. And thus far, Iran has not targeted these desalination plants. But if the US massively escalates this war and starts bombing Iranian electrical and energy infrastructure, then Iran could also move up the escalation ladder and hit desalination plants and other critical infrastructure in the neighboring countries. Of course, it's not the continental United States that is impacted by this. The US is on the other side of the world, but it's these major US allies and proxies that are the ones getting hit really hard. And by the way, we here at Geopolitical Economy Report published another video in July talking about how Yemen has now entered the war after the US pressured Saudi Arabia to restart its war against Yemen, in particular against the so-called Houthis, officially known as Ansarullah, which are the political force that govern northern Yemen, where roughly 80% of the population lives. And they are allied with Iran. And after the US and Saudi Arabia started attacking Yemen, Yemen responded by hitting Saudi oil infrastructure, including the infrastructure used to transport oil from the east coast to the west coast of Saudi Arabia into the Red Sea. And also, Yemen has targeted Saudi oil tankers. So this is another reason why Riyadh is asking Washington to pause the war, because they're afraid of serious damage being done to their energy infrastructure. And of course, all of the economies in the Persian Gulf are petrostates. They all revolve around exporting oil and natural gas. And by the way, chemicals and other products in the petrochemical industry that are also needed for things like fertilizer, which has caused a fertilizer crisis around the world, which could potentially feed into a food crisis. So that partially explains why Trump paused his plan to carry out a massive campaign of terror and bomb Iran like something we haven't seen since World War II. But there are, of course, other factors. And one of the best analysts of this war has been Robert Pape, who's a professor of political science at the University of Chicago. And he pointed out some other very important factors here in the White House's decision-making. One of these other major issues is that the US military is running out of crucial ammunition, missiles, and interceptors for its air defense systems. Now, we have talked about this in previous videos, but more and more reporting has since come out showing that when the US started this war of aggression against Iran on the 28th of February, the US had 2,330 Patriot missile interceptors used for its air defense system. These are missiles that are used to shoot down Iranian missiles or drones. And as of the 8th of April, the US only had a bit over 1,000 of these. And as of the end of July, the US only had around 800 Patriot interceptors left. Moreover, the US has used up about half of the projectiles the interceptors used in its THAAD air defense system. Overall, CNN reported that the US military has used up nearly 80% of its key missile interceptors, and it would take years for the US to rebuild its stockpile. But that's not all. We're only talking about the interceptors used for the US air defense system. The US is also running out of its long-range missiles. In fact, Reuters reported that the US military has used, quote, virtually all, end quote, of its long-range precision missiles, including, for instance, ATACMS, as they're known. The US has used up virtually all of those long-range missiles, and the US has used up nearly half of its global Tomahawk missile supply. So that represents another important reason explaining why Trump called off this massive escalation, World War II style attack on Iran. So again, we've talked about how the Gulf regimes are very vulnerable because they need desalination plants to have drinking water. Their oil infrastructure can be targeted by Iran and its allies in the region. The US military is running out of missile interceptors and long-range missiles. And then finally, there's the issue of US bases in West Asia. Before Trump launched this war at the end of February, the US military had between 40,000 and 50,000 soldiers stationed at roughly 24 US military bases and installations across the region in most of the countries except for Iran, of course. And in response to this war of aggression, Iran retaliated in self-defense, which it's entitled to do under international law, by hitting the US military bases in the region. And it's been widely acknowledged in mainstream US media outlets that Iran succeeded in destroying or heavily damaging the vast majority of US bases in the region. And earlier I mentioned an article that was published this August in the Financial Times titled, "Iran Sets Pace in War with Donald Trump." And this report spells out Tehran's strategy and shows how successful it's been. So it quoted an actual Iran expert, Ali Nasser, who pointed out that Iran is expecting a very long war, and Iran's strategy is to force US troops out of the neighboring countries as far away as possible, kicking them out of the Gulf, Syria, and Iraq, and holding up these US troops in Israel and Jordan. And by the way, this is exactly what's happening. The Financial Times reported that in recent weeks, in July, Iran intensified its strikes against US troops and bases in Kuwait and Bahrain, forcing Washington to withdraw its US troops from those countries. And instead, many US troops are now in Jordan, Israel, and even farther away from Iran. So Tehran is succeeding. By the way, a journalist asked Trump about this in a press conference on the 2nd of August. There's no video, but there's audio of the press conference. The journalist said, there are reports that US soldiers have been kicked out of Kuwait and Bahrain by Iran. And Trump's only response was, quote, "I don't want to comment on that," end quote. So it's obviously a sensitive issue that the US is quite concerned about. Although I should say that if you've been following this war from the very beginning, this should not come as a surprise because it's been acknowledged before in mainstream US media outlets that Iran has succeeded in expelling many of the US troops from the region. Back in March, less than a month into this US war against Iran, the New York Times published a report titled "Iran's Attacks Force US Troops to Work Remotely." This article, which was published on the 25th of March, noted that Iran had kicked US soldiers out of the bases in the region. US soldiers were working from hotels and office spaces and civilian ports. This is why Iran was targeting that infrastructure, because the US was militarizing it. But it's not just that. The New York Times also reported that US Central Command, CENTCOM, had withdrawn many US troops from the region overall and sent thousands of US troops to Europe. And they're trying to wage war on Iran from bases in Europe, thousands of kilometers away. So all of this explains why it's clearly Iran that has the leverage in this war. Iran is winning. As the Financial Times put it in this report, quote, "Washington is increasingly fighting at a pace set by Tehran. Tehran has taken the initiative designed to exhaust the US and frighten its Arab allies," end quote. And again, this is why we constantly see this flip-flopping in the White House, where Trump says that he's going to destroy Iran, and then a few days later he says, actually, we're on the verge of signing a deal. They're going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. We won, they lost. And then every few days he does another 180. This is, of course, has led to the famous phrase taco, Trump always chickens out. And this professor of political science at the University of Chicago, Robert Pape, who I mentioned earlier, he wrote out a brief timeline showing 5 different times when Trump threatened to obliterate Iran, and then he tacoed. So in March, Trump gave a 48-hour deadline to Iran, saying that if Iran didn't surrender, he was going to destroy Iran. And then, of course, he chickened out. And then in April, Trump threatened to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age, and he again chickened out. And he agreed to a ceasefire that he eventually violated. Then in June, once again, Trump threatened the same. In July, he insisted that there was a probable deal that, of course, he violated. And then in early August, he said that the US military was locked and loaded and ready to destroy Iran, unleashing terror the world hasn't seen since World War II. And then he halted those attacks and claimed that supposedly the US had a deal in the making with Iran, that the deal would be signed in just a few days. But Tehran came out and said that's a lie, that Trump is just using this as an excuse. It's simply not true. And I explained in the last several minutes why Trump chickened out and was forced to backtrack yet again. So I began this analysis today pointing out that the US government has been losing this war against Iran. And that's true. It's been widely acknowledged. Earlier, I mentioned that the New York Times editorial board admitted that Trump lost this war, and the New York Times published an article this August going further into detail. The most mainstream US media outlet, the New York Times, noted that the US, quote, seems headed for a strategic defeat, end quote. It added, quote, Trump's goals remain unmet, and the US military is running short on key armaments that it needs for global reach. Iran is seemingly resolute under a more radical government. Its nuclear and ballistic missile programs are degraded but not destroyed, and the Strait of Hormuz is effectively under its control. The war has left both the United States and Israel in weaker positions. Washington is losing credibility both militarily and diplomatically. Its conduct in the war underscores the impression that the United States is an unpredictable instrument of global disorder, end quote. I agree with all of that, although I would add that this is not new to Trump. The US has always been a force of global destabilization and disorder. Look at the US invasion of Iraq under George W. Bush in 2003. Look at the US war in Vietnam, the war on Korea. The list goes on and on. The US has been always destabilizing independent foreign governments, invading countries all across Latin America, organizing coups d'etat in dozens of countries around the world, backing regime change operations and so-called color revolutions. But regardless, the point is that I certainly agree that the US government has been losing this war. And it's certainly true that the US and Israel have been weakened by this war, and that Iran has emerged as the victor, and Iran is now stronger than ever. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I am the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want
Salute, family. We in here.
Is the American Iranian author and political analyst, and a very considerable expert indeed. Although I don't know if he's psychologically qualified to evaluate the medical condition of Donald Trump. I'll give it a try. Trita Parsi, welcome back to the mother of...
Thanks so much for having me again.
I'm right, Amitai. Donald Trump is, somewhat schizophrenic when it comes to Iran. It wouldn't surprise me to see him, turning out in Iranian national costume some days. And on other days, he's going to wipe the entire civilization off the face of the earth. Which is the real Donald Trump? Will he stand up?
I think the real Donald Trump is the one that currently is extremely desperate and who is going to go along with some sort of a deal, most likely, because he's finally realized that he does not have any other options. I think the Iranian strategy has been that because they have seen that he is constantly willing to use military force to improve his negotiating position and by that go in and out of war, that as long as Trump thinks he still can use the military option, he will. And as a result, if you want him to fully commit to diplomacy, then you have to deprive him of that military option. And I think that is what part of the reason why the Iranians have at times escalated themselves. And now we're hearing more and more stories coming out of the Pentagon. Not only has the US essentially depleted its stockpile of interceptors, it's also depleted much of its stockpiles of Tomahawks and other projectiles and missiles, meaning that the capacity of simply conducting war is increasingly compromised. And again, only then will he become serious about diplomacy. That's at least the Iranian calculation.
And then, of course, there are increasing signs that the neighbors, former American satrapies, former payers of protection money for decades of the United States, in the end didn't get any protection and realized that their own existential interests were being challenged. And they seem to be taking a larger role. Do you see it that way?
I see. And first, on your first premise, absolutely, they were not protected. I think they're very upset because they perceive the U.S.'s strategy to have been to protect Israel far more than protecting even America's own bases in the GCC territories. There is data that shows that the U.S. actually fired off more interceptors to protect Israel than Israel fired off interceptors to protect Israel. So I think altogether you have a picture in which many of these countries are losing faith in the capacity of the United States to actually protect them, the reliability of that protection. And on top of that, the competence. I think part of the reason why the Saudis intervened and pushed in order for Trump not to escalate further, I personally don't think he actually was going to, but nevertheless, the Saudis had to, they could not take the risk, they had to push back, is because they knew that America's escalatory options were rather useless. All it would lead to is the Iranians retaliating against the GCC states. So the GCC states would pay a high price, but nothing would change on the ground in terms of changing the realities of the war. So it would be all loss, no gain. And once a superpower has achieved this level of lack of confidence, it's a very bad situation, obviously, for the US.
When a bully who has spent, half a century, more than half a century, swinging his fists in the playground and threatening and bludgeoning, browbeating everyone, terrifying everyone, when he stood up to and decked and suddenly doesn't look so tough anymore, that usually means a profound change in the overall picture. And as you describe it, I'm seeing the new world order emerging in the Persian Gulf, where people who, to say they paid protection money is to understate it. They were giving him gold and jewels. They were giving him state-of-the-art
airplanes,
airliners as personal gifts. They paid more protection money than anyone ever paid. The Genovese family didn't get it. They're going to be looking elsewhere for security arrangements now, aren't they?
Oh, totally. I think you're going to see diversification in which they're not going to rely on the US solely any longer, because that's obviously not a particularly useful strategy. The question is, what directions will they go? I think that they will continue to buy a lot of American weaponry, but they're not going to invest in the bases any longer. And I don't think they will be open to paying for the rebuilding of many bases. And I think the US is not going to bother doing it either. It's going to use it as an excuse at some point to just get out of the Middle East, which is what the US should have done a long time ago. And many presidents promised that they would do, but they never did. But for some of these GCC countries, they're now looking to see if there's a constellation of an alliance with Turkey and Pakistan and Egypt, other ways to be able to balance against Iran, since they do perceive a threat from Iran and now have no protection. I don't think those constellations are in and of themselves going to work. I cannot see Turkey or Pakistan going to war with Iran on behalf of any of these different countries. But I think the more important element here is there's going to have to be some foundational balancing configuration. But the thing that will make a difference is if the region now actually moves towards creating its own security architecture that is relying on their own strength rather than importing that protection from elsewhere. And if they make that an inclusive security order, building upon what the OSCE did, what ASEAN has done, and actually move towards a collective security framework. If that is done, the outcome of this could end up becoming actually very, very good for everyone. That would be to take a page out of the European playbook. The European playbook that was tremendously successful until Europe abandoned it essentially in 2022, in which Europe had several decades, 5 decades of unprecedented peace because it was trying to build a mentality, a paradigm of indivisible security. The Middle East has never had that, but it's fascinating to me to see how much the European states are now moving towards thinking along those lines, recognizing for a security standpoint, they can no longer isolate and contain and sanction Iran. They need to have interdependence and economic integration with Iran in order for their own security to be able to flourish, nevertheless, let alone Iran's economy to be able to flourish. If that thinking takes hold, I think there actually can be a quite positive future for the Middle East going forward.
Well, unprecedented peace if you're not sitting in Yugoslavia like me, but let's not be diverted on that, Doctor. Let's get down to the granular detail of these talks that are going on. I must say, although I've been wrong before on this, in this last 12 months on this, but it looks quite positive to me. Just before the show, the Iranians said they had reached agreement with Oman on which way in and which way out. And if Trump is looking for a way out, there's an off-ramp right there.
Absolutely. There is an off-ramp. It seems like much of this arrangement is just going to be a more detailed one of the same version that existed before. Part of the reason why this whole thing broke down was because of some ambiguity on exactly the direction of traffic, what would this southern lane be used for, etc. These things are now clarified. There was actually a proposal on the table in the back before this war restarted that should have been adopted, which would have had essentially notifications go in both directions. All ships would have to notify both to Iran and to Oman or another GCC state. Should have been taken. We could have avoided these last couple of weeks of unnecessary warfare. It seems like it's going back to that. And at this point, frankly, Trump just needs an exit. He needs an exit out of this. And I think he's going to take it. And there's going to be a lot of criticism in Washington, D.C. over this. A lot of the hawks, a lot of the blob personalities are going to come out and that this is disastrous because it's going to give some sort of a legitimization for the degree of control that Iran then will have over the Strait. Reality, however, is this. This war did not give Iran control over the Strait. This war revealed that Iran had that control, that it had the capacity for that control. Recognizing this does not expand that Iranian control. It helps you manage and to a certain extent even limit that control. And the core interest of the United States at the end of the day has not been traditionally to prevent other powers from having control. The core interest has been to make sure that the trade is free and non-discriminatory and predictable. That can be achieved through this Omani-Iranian deal. But if the objective is suddenly that, there cannot be any semblance or an illusion of control, then we're going to go back to war in order to uphold an illusion that never was true, which was that the Iranians cannot close the Strait of Hormuz. We know now that they always could have done that, at least for the last couple of years. The only reason why what this war changed is that it revealed that reality. And as a result, I do think that the U.S. should go in this direction, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of voices in Washington who would prefer war than this type of a compromise.
Well, there'll be a lot of huffing and puffing from the Israel lobby for a start. The Mark Levins, the Shapiros, and the rest. But as the current wave of primary upsets for AIPAC are making clear, and the opinion polls still clearer, there's never been a worse time to be an Israel zealot in the United States, has there?
This is, I think last night was historic, and I think we have clearly now passed an inflection point. For years, there's been an open secret. People knew that the policies that AIPAC and that pro-Israel crowd was pushing for was bad policy. It was bad for the region. It was bad for the United States. Arguably, in the long run, was also very bad for Israel itself. But it was good politics because this kind of disturbance came in through the type of impact that AIPAC had and made sure that members of Congress felt safe, constantly voting for bad policy because politically, it made them safe. Politically, it protected them. Politically, they got a lot of campaign donations. Now we have essentially seen this anomaly be shattered. Now, good policy has to be followed by good politics and vice versa. You're not going to have a situation in which bad policy is good politics. And I think this is and it's not just the race in Michigan. There were several other races in which very strong pro-Israel candidates were defeated in these primaries by people who explicitly ran on this. And if you listen to a lot of folks in Washington who are not necessarily in the mainstream, we were saying for several months, these primaries, both on the left and on the right, many of them, the litmus test is going to be Israel, Palestine, and Gaza. And we're now seeing that in a very, very astonishing way. And I think there's shockwaves that are now being sent out. Going forward, any politician that is just taking AIPAC money is not going to sleep as safely at night because they know people will organize against them, and it is profoundly unpopular with the electorate, both on the left and on the right. That's very important to note.
And then there is tonight's development of Tucker Carlson, Massey, Taylor Greene, Kent, and the others. Tucker will be broadcasting right after this show this evening, and I'm sure many of our audience will stay up to watch him. The platform, as far as I can see, is an anti-Iran war platform for the new movement, third party movement, party, whatever it's going to be called, anti-Iran war, an end to the endless subvention of Israel, an end to the support for Israel's wars, empathy for the Palestinians, the kids in Gaza, and so on. And these are politicians of the right, Trita.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the things that a lot of folks in the establishment in Europe for a very long time have not been able to grasp. First of all, spending time in Europe and talking to decision makers there, has always been stunned how profoundly they have misread the United States. I think it's forgivable that they didn't see the emergence of Trump. Not a lot of people did, but they were really counting on some sort of idea that Biden had put everything back to normal and that Trump was simply just an aberration. It's very clear for anyone who was living here that that was not the case. He was essentially just channeling an energy that goes far beyond him. The other thing that was really difficult for them to grasp is how the American populace was turning against Israel on the left, and of course also now as of late on the right. And the one on the right they have completely missed, have fundamentally misunderstood how anti-war sentiments on the American right are so profoundly strong. And they have grown stronger in the last couple of years. And that what Trump did with the Iran war and what Netanyahu did by coming to the White House in February of 2025, not even giving Trump 10 days of presidency before he came there knocking on the door asking for war with Iran. It has really just taken the veil off of any effort of trying to sugarcoat Israel's influence and the direction of Israel's influence in the United States. And as a result, you know, the party that Tucker is putting together is a manifestation of that. It's going to be very interesting if there's going to be a left wing to that same party, to that same movement, in which folks on the left are coming together on this issue as well, because these are issues that are truly uniting both elements on the left and on the right. They may have profound disagreements on other things, but this is becoming an overarching issue in a manner that foreign policy very rarely do become in U.S. politics.
Well, I'm all in for it as a man of the left. If they're looking for a foreign branch, I'm ready to head the initiative. Finally, prediction's a hazy science, of course, but is your prediction like mine that this deal, this Iran deal, is going to be made now? Or might we, given the schizophrenia involved in Donald Trump, might we be back to war again by the weekend?
I wouldn't say by the weekend. I do think that this deal on the Straits looks quite plausible at this time. But I think it's important to understand the deal that actually puts an end to the war altogether is a deal that not only deals with the Straits, also deals with the nuclear issue, and very importantly, also deals with the Iranian demand for a regional ceasefire. That means an end to Israel's occupation of Lebanon, an end to Israel's bombardment of southern Lebanon and of Beirut. And we saw how upset the Israelis were when they understood that that is what the United States had signed with the MOU and deeply opposed it. So this deal on the Strait is only 1/3 of the totality of this. So I can see that one going forward. That does not guarantee success on those two other issues. And if those two other issues are not successful, at the end of the day, we will not have an end to this war. So I think we still have a significant distance to go.
Well, of course, the midterms will have occurred by the time we get there, so that'll change the calculus still further. But I don't want to tempt you into the granular detail of Iranian politics, but I was talking to a fellow just the other day who had just spent some weeks in Iran, and he described to me something which isn't actually all that visible to the ordinary viewer from outside, namely the very strong tendencies that exist inside Iran, inside the Islamic Republic camp, where there are some people who would insist on all three of your three legs to this stool, but there are some who are at least perceived would be ready to settle for only one of them. The nuclear question is easily solved. It's actually not even much now discussed. The Straits is, but the regional issue of continuing war with America for Lebanon, for Gaza. I know that for public consumption, all Iranians say it has to be the triptych, but some of the powerful people in Iran are not quite as committed to that triptych, at least according to their critics inside the country.
Look, let's set aside public opinion on this issue, because I think right now that is not really what's driving this. I think the security thinking, the dominant security thinking is, and I don't think it has changed since the MOU was signed, that unless there's a regional ceasefire, the war with Iran will restart. If the Israelis are permitted to restart the war with Lebanon, then that will then create a conflict that eventually will suck in the US and Iran into it anyways. Moreover, it's not for Lebanon. I think at the end of the day, all of these different governments and states make calculations for their own best interests. And a strong Hezbollah in Lebanon is one of the strongest deterrences against Israel restarting the war with Iran. That's part of the reason why they didn't start the war with Iran in 2006, because they did not manage to defeat Hezbollah. 2024 and 2025 was a different story because Hezbollah was so much weakened. And then that comes to the question of what would the Iranians trust the most? A deal with Trump or their defenses, a forward defense in Lebanon? And I think there, the overwhelming majority of the security establishment, as it looks today, I'm setting aside public opinion now, is that they don't have enough confidence in the United States to bet everything on that instead of at least having.
Revolutionary salute to our family. Paul Gordon, 7048 for the two Jews to the war chest. Revolution is real life. Absolutely appreciate the love, soldier. Salute.
A bet on Hezbollah and that forward defense. And given how Trump has behaved and what he has done with numerous deals, including what he did with the Saudi deal right now, I think the amount of willingness to take a risk on just trusting a deal with Trump is at a minimum right now. So I don't see a high likelihood at all that the Iranians will go for a deal unless the Lebanese element of it is included. Gaza is different. It is ideologically very important to them. But from a security standpoint, Gaza has never played the same role for the Iranians as southern Lebanon does.
Analyst and highly decorated combat veteran. Doug, as always, welcome to the show.
Yeah, good to see you, Dan.
Well, let's just start off with this first one here because President Trump made a very confident. What he is and is not willing to do with Iran.
Totally obliterate everything. Obliterate everything, and that's where we were headed. And they wanted to negotiate, and we're doing that, and it seems to be working out quite well.
What makes you think this will be different? Because they
never
tend
know.
to never.
It may be and may not be. I think that the threat of this, I mean, this was more than a threat. We were ready to go. And, you know, in life, they know when you're ready to go and when you're just bluffing. No, we were ready to go, and we are ready to go. We have to do that.
Yeah, go ahead. He may be right on that last part. People know when you're bluffing. What do you say to that? Because he's claiming with this weird at the beginning of this, I was not bluffing. We were ready to drop the ball on him, and that's working out nicely. That's what's caused him to come back to the table. And then the guy says, well, why do you think they'll be different this time? And he goes, oh, well, it may not work. So which is it? What do you think?
I think I, like a lot of other people, have stopped listening to much of what the president says. You have to look at what he does and forget about whatever he's saying. And unfortunately, in this sense, there is no evidence whatsoever that I can find from anybody who is in a position to know that there are any discussions going on between us and the Iranians. None. So my assumption is nothing's changed. The military buildup continues. And as I understand it, there is a buildup. Additional assets are being brought into the theater. So my assumption is at some point he's going to pull the trigger.
And what do you think, even before we get into what some others are saying here, what happens if he pulls that trigger? I mean, is that going to budge the Iranians loose? Is that going to diminish their missile capacity so that they can't hang on to the Strait of Hormuz? What is that going to do?
Well, I wouldn't expect a great deal to change. You've got to look at this thing from different angles. From the Iranian standpoint, they've captured the strategic high ground. They hold the initiative. We're now in the position of trying to regain it. How do we regain it? The only way to regain it is to attack Iran. How do you attack Iran? Are we going to do something new and different from what we've done in the past? I think that's pretty tough. So what are you going to do? I think you're going to do what you've done before with greater force and greater intensity if you can do it. This is kind of a return to what we call the gambler's fallacy, Dan. Somebody like Trump is a gambler, and he says, I always win. I'm a lucky guy. I always win. I know one more throw and I can win. And I think that's on his mind. Now that he's going to roll the dice again on the assumption that this time, with every B-52, every B-1, every B-2, every aircraft that currently is flyable, with every bomb and munition that we can scrape together that still is precise in some way, all of that will be hurled at Iran. And this time, quote unquote, it's going to work. Now, the other thing that we can't lose sight of is that the people that put him into office are the ones that have been pushing this war. And they want this war to go on. The job now is to utterly destroy Iran. If you can't change the government, if you can't push the population into revolt, and all of that is nonsense, it was never going to happen, then what do? Well, you destroy Iran. And that's where we are.
Well, at least that's where we want to be. We'll find out where we are. Interesting. Well, still, President Trump is still talking like, yeah, this attacks or these threat of attacks is going to bring Iran back to the table. And let's look at that. As far as what is your understanding, if there is, if you can divine one, as to what kind of a deal President Trump's even talking about now, because we had a deal. He signed a deal just in June 17th, so less than 2 months ago. That fell apart right away. So what is your understanding of even what kind of deal he's trying to get now?
That's a good question. I don't really know. Remember that it's all about appearing to have won. But even that is not enough, because he's got to go back hat in hand to his bosses, Netanyahu, the Zionist billionaires. And he's got to say, okay, this is what I think I can get. Will this be enough? And I don't think very much is going to be enough for them, short of the total destruction of Iran. Remember, this is a war from the very beginning, not about something important to us. We've been down this road so many times, Dan, listen to so many people talk about Iran. Listen to all the claims that Iran is evil incarnate and bent on the destruction of everyone, everywhere, all the time. It's all nonsense. It's just not true. We know that. So this is a war for Jewish supremacy in the Middle East and in the region. And it's tied in strange ways back to New York City and the international finance community. and quite frankly can no longer be viewed separately from Ukraine, because the same people pushing the war against Iran in the Middle East are also pushing war against Russia in Ukraine. So that you've got a larger enchilada, if you will, than you started with. So you can't expect some sort of flimsy piece of paper that grants Iran control of the Strait of Hormuz, or any significant sovereignty issues, or doesn't eliminate the nuclear capability. Anything that falls short of those things, Dan, is simply not going to be accepted.
But towards what end? I mean, just forget about morality, take that in, or even logic, and take that out the window. But there has to be some kind of mentality behind this idea that, especially those who appear to actually want to merge the two together and to go down a path that any neophyte can see, that the Iran war is not militarily winnable, and yet they are pushing for exactly that. And if they know rationally that they're not going to get a military victory, then what is the advantage to the people pushing this to try anyway?
Well, the government that we're backing in all of this is Israel. What do Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have to say? What are they talking about? They're talking about the systematic removal of the Palestinian population from both the West Bank and Gaza. They would prefer to push them out. If they won't be pushed out, they'll kill them. They've gone into Lebanon with the same basic goal in mind, up to the Litani River at least. And for the moment, that seems to be on hold, but there's nothing settled. So I think the answer is, as you point out, is certainly not rational. And I think Donald Trump is on that train. He's sitting in the locomotive. He may not be actively pulling all the levers or choosing the tracks, but he's on for the ride. And it's do or die in his mind. I think it's do or die in the minds of the Israelis and their backers here in the United States. And anybody who disagrees, of course, is an anti-Semite, a Jew hater, or some other nonsense. But I think it's wearing thin. You know, we had this Grinkiewicz, the Army general, or I don't know if he's an Army general, Air Force general, who is over in NATO, and he said he's got to make a choice between defending Israel and defending the United States if he doesn't get another destroyer. It sounds a bit over the top, but I think he was trying to make a point on a larger scale. I'm surprised he's still on the job. I think that's where we are. So if you're looking for a rational explanation, you're not going to find it. There's nothing rational anymore.
Just about continuing war. Well, somebody who seems to be in that camp and in that school of thought is General Jack Keane, who here is going to be talking about, you know what? Forget about a deal. I don't want any deal.
I've always been opposed to the deal, even if it was perfect.
Yes.
Let's assume there is a deal here. We cannot do what we did with the memorandum of understanding and remove sanctions immediately.
Right.
No money, no funding, no relief of unfrozen assets, none of that. That has to be kicked down the road, and we have to absolutely see some fundamental change in Iran's behavior.
Yes.
Restriction on ballistic missiles, no support for proxies are the other two major issues here as well. That's not on the table here for this construction. But before we give up money, they should be.
So he is, I mean, just flat out. We are saying, let's go back to unconditional surrender. That's exactly what he's describing there. But he's supposed to be General Jack Keane. He's supposed to know that there is no military path, especially with bombs only, especially with our inventories. We'll get to that in a second. He should know that, and yet there he is, emphatically said. I think that, Doug, that he recognizes the same thing you do, that Trump has kind of wavered, so he's trying to push him over the top to don't even have a deal, go back to military strikes.
Well, you got to look at a number of things. First of all, I mean, because you bring up General Jack Keane on a routine basis, you probably should go into public records and pull up all of his investments, his interests, his income, and so forth, and you'll discover that he's part of the same community that Larry Kudlow lives in New York City. That community is committed to everything that Jack Keane and Larry Kudlow explained. That particular community right now controls the White House and the Hill. So he's really preaching they're not part of that community. We find this irrational and self-defeating. But I think, in his view, there's nothing to be gained by becoming rational at this point. Look at the performance of the big five industries in the defense sector. Look where they were in 2022 and where they are today. You're talking about jumps from $22 a share up to $70 a share and higher. My point is that a lot of money is being made by a lot of people, not just in the circle of the White House. We all know how that's been going. We've watched them short oil, and we've watched Trump sort of create a culture of manipulation that allows people to profit from these crises and wars. This is all part of it. So there's no incentive for him to take the position that you and I do. You and I aren't profiting from these things, but they are. And I think that's the simple explanation. Now, Larry Kudlow, of course, is a little different because he's emotionally committed. This is more important to him than anything else. And he's going to sign on for anything that promises the total annihilation of Iran. And literally, that's what these people are talking about. My point is that's not going to happen. It can't be achieved. But that's what they're pushing Donald Trump to do.
You know, it's funny. If Jack Keane is outright saying I don't want any deal, let's just require forced surrender. There are others that seem to be a little bit more pragmatic, but maybe a little bit more immoral and unethical as well. Here is Jim Hansen. It's also on Fox News, and he's going to be saying, "Okay, this is out loud, by the way. Look, let's just tell Iran whatever they want to hear to get us to the midterms, and then we'll bring the hammer down."
President Trump does not want to go into the midterms with chaos in the Middle East, no oil flowing, the markets in response to that. He needs to have Republicans retain control of Congress so that he has freedom of maneuver after the midterms. That doesn't mean he's going to give them what they want. He can keep them at bay with military force if he needs to, if they're not willing to make a deal. Between now and the midterms, he'll mitigate what damage they can cause to oil prices and our economy, and he'll hope that they will sign some sort of a short-term deal. After the midterms, I wouldn't want to be them.
So, I mean, he is literally saying, look, I know we've lied to them in the past and pretended in negotiations. Let's do it again and then just get to the midterms, and then with no more constraints, then we'll come in with the heavy weapons. How is that going to be received in Iran?
Well, I don't know Hansen, what his background is and what leads him to these conclusions, but there's something we ought to agree on right now, right up front. If Donald Trump ended this war unilaterally on his own and said, this is it, I've gone as far as I can go, it's in the interest of the global economy as well as our own for this war to end, so I'm going to disengage our forces from this war, and began a slow, deliberate, and methodical withdrawal, he would be cheered from coast to coast, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The overwhelming majority of the American electorate wants nothing to do with this war. They don't care about it. They don't want it. They don't care about it. So there's no loss for Donald Trump in that sense politically. So he's dead wrong. In fact, if he ended this flat out, as we just discussed, and got out, I think we'd probably see a different outcome in the midterms. It certainly would be better than it will be at this point. But he doesn't seem to understand that. And that's understandable because he's probably part of that bubble that we were talking about earlier. And you have this minority that has enormous financial power that is in control. They want this war of annihilation waged against Iran. End of discussion, full stop. They're driving it. And Trump owes them an enormous gratitude for his position in the White House and his position in politics. And I still think to some extent he must be under some form of duress.
It's interesting that what you say there is maybe more true than some even realize. This past weekend, I was at an event where pollster Rich Barris was speaking, and he and I had a sidebar conversation, and he expressed some of his real frustration because he had recently went to the White House and told President Trump exactly what you just said, that the numbers support what you said profoundly. He said, especially among his base, there is overwhelming support for just ending this war right now and moving on. And they don't care about any of those things. I mean, literally every word you just said was validated by the data and the numbers. And this is a guy that President Trump respects because he's the one that got 2016 right when nearly all the other pollsters got it wrong. And it's puzzling him and it's puzzling me why he's not making these decisions that are political winners for him, especially heading into the midterms, which makes me worried what you just said there, that maybe he's under duress for some other reason, which I can't divine.
Well, remember Tucker Carlson back in 2023 brought me on his show up at his residence up there in New England. And the first question out of his mouth was, do you think we're on the road to war with Iran? And I unhesitatingly said yes. Now, he subsequently went to the White House a couple of years later, met with President Trump, and then he reported after he'd met with him that Donald Trump fully understood the pitfalls. In other words, the problems with a war against Iran. He understood the risks. He understood the implications, even the ramifications strategically for us. And he left the Oval Office satisfied that the president understood what he was getting into. And he concluded the president would not get into it as a result. Well, he was wrong. And the president knew then and now, and he's done it anyway. So I think we have to, it's wrong. People say, well, this man can't be this stupid. He is not a stupid man. Emotionally unbalanced. There are a lot of problems there, but this is not somebody who's stupid. He may not be well read or well versed in the world that we live in overseas beyond our borders. But this man is not stupid. He understands what he started, and he understands what he's doing. So when you look at this and you say, well, then what is going on? You have to reach two conclusions, and I gave you the first one. The first one is, well, I started this. It's the gambler's fallacy. I've got to finish it. One more throw of the dice and I'll win. That's one part. Secondly, people have got something on him, something that is so powerful. He cannot possibly deviate from the path that he's on.
And I guess only time is going to tell us which one of those is. I wonder, because you've got some direct experience with President Trump and rationally coming to a decision and then having somebody change his mind later in 2021, when you were the special advisor to the Secretary of Defense, you came up with what I consider to be a brilliant plan to have gotten all of our troops out of Afghanistan in order in a coordinated manner before the end of his term when he left. And you even went so far as to actually get him to sign an execution order, which was subsequently sabotaged by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the acting Secretary of Defense afterwards. What did you see in his, because you mentioned that you don't think he's a stupid man, because you walked him through, as I understand, all of the benefits and the cost of potentially doing this. He came to the right conclusion, but then got talked out of it.
Well, I didn't walk him through the details, but he understood that it could be done. He understood, I think, that the winter was the ideal time. You've been in Afghanistan and you know the fighting season over there. The winter was a good time to pull out. But he was talked out of it. He was talked out of it by people in his own administration. That included the Secretary of Defense at the time. It also included Kash Patel, who went over with Mr. Miller, the Secretary of Defense. And they joined hands with Mitch McConnell and several other people from the Hill. And they all said, oh, you can't do this. We've already made commitments. We've talked to allies. We've this and that and everything else. And then he backed down and he said, well, what can I do? If I can't get everybody out, then what can I do? It's the old half pregnancy thing. And that's a political problem. No politician wants to bring the child to full term and then be responsible for it. So he backed down. And I think it was unfortunate. And the result is that what we saw under Biden was terrible. And it could have been avoided. But, he backed down. And this is one of the reasons that people accuse him of backing out on a number of different things. But this time around, I don't see any evidence for that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, well, I keep hoping so. But back to this gambler's fallacy here, trying to roll the dice and get something to happen. we just showed, the Hansen and Jack Keane and several others, they don't even want a deal. Well, it turns out there actually is some negotiations going on. It just doesn't include the United States. Here is the deputy Iranian foreign minister talking about the negotiations that are nearing a finalization between them and Oman, with an important caveat.
Significant progress has been made in the talks with Oman, and these advancements are on the verge of being finalized. We were not and are not actually looking to implement Clause 5 of the Memorandum of Understanding right now, because the United States has set aside all its obligations, and we too have set aside our obligation regarding the Strait of Hormuz. What we are doing with Oman is a natural path, regardless of whether a memorandum of understanding existed or not. I stated that if we want normal conditions to be established in the Strait of Hormuz, it must be through the path of understanding between Iran and Oman, not through the path of imposition and influence.
So the Iranians looked like they've said, you know what, I'm just leaving the U.S. behind. We're going to work on our own deal that's going on here. And then, whereas President Trump is issuing these warnings he did in that first one, Iran is also issuing its own warnings by saying that they warned the Gulf states that any new U.S. strikes on Iran would trigger retaliatory attacks on their oil, power, water, and transportation networks. Reuters reports that Tehran delivered the message through senior diplomatic contacts with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Pakistan, urging regional partners to pressure Trump to abandon military action and return to negotiations. And from what we've been able to understand, that's why the last round didn't happen that previous weekend, because Saudi Arabia was the leading voice that say, don't do this because we're going to get hit and there's nothing you can do to stop it. How do you see this dynamic? And what if the whole region comes to some kind of accommodation without us even being involved?
Well, remember what President Trump said when he signed the MOU in Paris at Versailles. He said, I don't want to be Herbert Hoover, and I'm not going to be responsible for a global depression that results. So this is a man who understands the consequences. And what you just showed in that well, I don't know if it was a memorandum or it's just a tweet. What you showed states very clearly what the Iranians have said from the beginning. If you destroy our oil infrastructure, you destroy our power, water, and transportation networks, we will utterly obliterate everything on the other side of the Gulf. In other words, on the western side of the Persian Gulf. The little state, I don't think people in the United States realize how fragile those states are, how little they can mobilize in terms of military power to defend themselves. Saudi Arabia is viewed, like the UAE, is very duplicitous, as playing all sides to the middle. And so the Iranians, their attitude is these people have screwed us, taken advantage of us, hurt us, harmed us, cooperated with our enemies, the Israelis and others, on a routine basis. So we have no compunction or hesitation whatsoever about destroying them. I think President Trump realizes that, and I'm sure that he is being reluctant to take action. However, Israelis don't care. And their agents in Washington don't care. They could care less. As far as they're concerned, everybody in the region can die if it's going to promote their dominance, their control of the region. I mean, frankly, that's it. All you have to do is listen to the Israeli leadership. They make that abundantly clear. So I think we're back to where we started. President Trump, if he pushes, let's put it this way, there are three doors. Door number one is reopen the war with everything you've got. Door number two is do nothing. And door number three is do a little and then try to negotiate. Well, you've already tried door number one. You're going to go back to door number one? Well, maybe so. Door number two, do nothing. That's not up for consideration. He can't sustain himself politically. Money that is vital to his survival in the White House to deliver the Congress is at risk. Remember, the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being assembled in various funds to destroy people like Thomas Massie, or for that matter, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or anyone who opposes this war with Iran. that those funds can be applied to destroy Donald Trump. And Donald Trump knows that. Right now, those funds are being committed to his support and defense. Those funds are vital to his survival because they can prevent any impeachment. So doing nothing is a non-starter. What about door number 3? Well, we know that President Netanyahu was furious at President Trump's decision to postpone the attack. And lots of people are saying, well, you know, he's reconsidering. But we also know there are problems with the munitions, and we are waiting for resupply, and we're bringing more aircraft into the theater. So there are other things going on here as well. So my point is, when you look at the 3 doors, you could try door 3 again, but that hasn't been very fruitful. So you're really being pushed back to door number 1, which is all-out war.
And as you say, there's a problem with door number 1 again, aside from the fact that it didn't work the first time, and the target set and the Iranians underground caverns under these granite mountains, that hasn't changed either. But there is something different than the last time we tried door number 1, is that virtually all of our long-range precision missiles, according to reports, are running low, and that's the interceptors, and that's the offensive missiles, etc. But this morning, President Trump says, yeah, that's not true. He says the U.S. has massive amounts of munitions, especially of certain types. Additionally, large amounts are being manufactured and shipped to the U.S. as needed. Defense companies are building the largest number of plants and factories in our country's history. The leakers of these treason statements are being hunted down. Long-term jail sentences will be sought. So who's true? Is President Trump right, or is the media right?
Well, the media, forget the media. They're mission stocks that, frankly, people have been saying for weeks and weeks and weeks. It's not a secret. So I don't know what he's talking about in terms of leakers. What I can tell you is that the defense industry, if you ask somebody at the top of the defense industry, I talked recently to someone who spent much of his life in it. He said, let's understand something, Doug. First of all, there is no declared war. In the absence of a declared war, we haven't mobilized industry. We're expecting industry to behave today the way it behaved in 1944-45 without mobilization. That's the first thing. You've got to essentially move resources, people, capabilities from the private sector into the defense sector. We haven't done it. And we're not going to get the outcome that he wants. And the other thing is, there's a big difference between building missiles and putting together jeeps or tanks. You're not just screwing on lug nuts. You're dealing with assembly lines that are very complex. They involve human beings, not just robotics. There are some robotics, but a lot of it is human intervention to ensure that the microchips, the microcircuitry, and everything else is where it belongs, because these are very expensive. It's use it once, throw it away. If you're going to use it, it has to work. And most of what we produce does have good reliability. Now, we can argue about the air and missile defense. That's a different issue. And a lot of that technology is not new. But if you look at the standard missiles, you look at the strike weapons that we have, those are really state of the art, and they have a very good performance rating. But you can't just produce them, crank them out the way we cranked out Sherman tanks or B-17 bombers. It doesn't work that way. So we got to say those things. And I think Trump, I assume he knows that. And these threats about people leaking, nobody's leaked anything of real significance. I certainly have never seen anything that I thought was classified. But there is such a thing as general knowledge. And people in the armed forces are not stupid. Sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines know what is real and what isn't. They know what they've got, what they don't. And so right now, the percentages, I've heard people say we've got only 20 to 30% of what we need. I've heard people saying only 20 or less. I've heard other people say different things. The point is that we have exhausted our arsenal to a large extent. Are we at risk now of going under in a war with a major power? Not unless we attack somebody, and we're stupid. We could, but nobody wants a war with us. And I think probably inwardly President Trump understands that. And I think his view is, well, we're not giving up, and we're going to use what we have and build back up later. I suspect that's going on as a conversation.
And what happens, Doug? Let's say that the Jack Keanes and like the Tom Cottons and some of these others, they get their way, Netanyahu, and he goes ahead and he does this World War II style deal where he goes even bigger than the first time. And I mean, just look, from 40 days, we burned through 40 to 60% of some of these categories just by itself. And if we went another, let's say 1 month, we could literally be out of some of these, or at least down to just like fumes in some of these categories. But the likelihood is, almost the certainty is, militarily speaking, we would be in no different position than we are today, except for a bunch of more Iranians would be dead, probably some more Americans would be dead, but we'd be in the same strategic place we are now. What are we going to do then? Because then they won't have the resources to go and fire a bunch more missiles. What are we going to do then?
Well, you and I agree that the high probability is that strategically, in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it turns out to be, and we don't know when he's going to pull the trigger, we'll be in the same position we were at the beginning. I think you're right. At that point, there's either nothing left or so little that we can't afford to continue. And of course, we're not even talking about what's happening in the private sector. We're not talking about the market.
Yeah.
You know, Trump is developed this culture of manipulation, which has helped to create the illusion of wealth and prosperity. The market keeps rising and rising, and everybody says this is great. It's back to, 1929 in June. Everything looked the way it does right now. October, things changed radically. But people that say those things are saying, no, you're wrong. No, it's not going to work that way. I keep telling people I'm not an expert, but I listen to people who are. And if you go down the list, you listen to Luke Groman and Jeffrey Gundlach, you listen to Pilkington or Jeff Curie on oil, the situation is not good. It's very, very fragile. It's very dangerous. And what they point to is something that most Americans don't pay any attention to, and that's you go and look at the treasuries and you say, well, the 10-year treasury is at 4.7. All the experts say if it rises to 5%, we're in real trouble. We won't be able to sustain that debt. We can't pay it all. We can't pay the required payment. And at the same time, they say, well, interest rates will fall. When they fall, that's okay. But, right now they're rising. And so that means bonds have to fall. Well, unfortunately, interest rates are rising and the bond yields are rising at the same time. This is sort of a double envelopment for disaster. But all the great men on Wall Street that are friends with Donald Trump are all saying, oh, no, don't worry about that. And remember what Mellon said in June of 1929. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. He was in Besant's job. And he said, we live in an era of unbroken prosperity.
Yeah, and you can see where that 10-year treasury yield has gone just up since March, when right about the time this war started, and it's continuing on a general trend upward to where we might potentially get to that 5% point you're talking about.
There's another quick example to talk about, and that is our intervention to bail out the yen for the Bank of Japan. And we went into a fund of euros, access to euros that we have. I don't know where that is or how that works, but we pumped great quantities of euros into Japan to rescue the yen. Now, have we solved the problem? Have we ended the indebtedness? Is Japan now on the path to prosperity and goodness? No, it's a temporary fix. Why did we use euros instead of dollars? Because the dollar has been weakening against the euro. By using the euros, we potentially weaken the euro and strengthen the dollar. And Besant's very clever. He's an intelligent man, but he's dealing with Band-Aids. He's dealing with quick fixes designed to get you through the quarter.
Yeah.
Or in our case right now, through the next 2, 3, 4 months at most. It's not a fix. It's not an answer. It's not a solution. The solution that makes the most sense, in my judgment, for President Trump and for us, is to get out of the war. Get out of the Gulf. It's over. We're fighting a rear guard action. This whole thing of global military hegemony is over. First of all, we don't need it. It's too expensive. The world doesn't want it. It's time to get out of it.
Indeed it is. But the problem, well, there's many problems, but one of them you actually mentioned earlier in this episode here, I want to go into, and that's the beginning to merge of the war in Russia, Ukraine with the war in the Middle East there. And one of the first, I guess, manifestations of that is in the air war. And here just recently, Kiev has been getting hit relentlessly. I think they did again overnight here. And in the previous night, the previous one, none of the missiles were intercepted at all because there weren't even any Patriot interceptions attempts. Not even that it doesn't succeed very well, but there weren't even any to go up. And this war is starting to turn really problematic. Zelensky saying, hey, I think I want to be out of this by the end of the year. Well, the only way that's going to happen is if he submits to Russian claims. Although, and this is the weird part again, you talk about people disconnected from reality. You have Zelensky saying, hey, I want to pressure Russia with sanctions, with these long-range strikes. And there was more of those again overnight in Russia, another oil reprocessing facility that was hit. And there's been the wild berries continue to get hit even yesterday. So what is going on with this war here in the minds of Zelensky / the Europeans, or maybe even / the United States here? Because you have Secretary of State Marco Rubio again now all of a sudden saying we're trying to find a resolution to this. These are some pretty amazing shots just from last night. And again, you see nothing is intercepting these missiles when they hit the ground. What do you say?
Well, let's talk about a couple of things. The first thing is it's very obvious that what Putin said a week or so ago is now begun, and that is the intensity of attacks and the commitment to take more territory and advance to the Dnieper. These things are real. He said he was going to do everything in his power to destroy this government, this regime in Kiev. And I think you mentioned to me, I think before the show started, you said someone you'd talked to said it's a ghost town, Kiev, at this point. People I'm talking to that have recently returned from Ukraine have said that it's a zombie state. You know, what you have is the facade of a state. And then you have Europeans and unfortunately Americans helping the Ukrainians with things like long-range drones and long-range missiles to try and create the illusion that there is life left in Ukraine. And unfortunately, we're helping them with the targeting data. We have run all the flights and all the satellite passes. We know where all the refineries are. We're providing that targeting data to the Ukrainians. They're using it. And they have reduced, I think, Russia's refining capacity by about 38%, maybe more by now. This has, of course, created a very grim picture globally of oil. And the interesting thing is that we're actually buying Russian oil on the open market, Dan. Most people don't know that. In other words, we're making the economic picture worse. We're making it more hazardous. Now, Russia is going to survive this. They're repairing those refineries. They've got plenty of oil and they can produce what they need. But it's hurting others in the world that need access to the refined products that Russia was producing. But that doesn't seem to matter to anybody. Anyway, that's number one. Number two is that I think we're seeing now some shakeups in the Russian military command structure. And those are not insignificant. When I say shakeup, it's not a question of firing lots of people and bringing in new people. Some people are new, but most of them are being moved around. And one of the key decisions that was made within the last 72 to 96 hours was to bring in a new general who has been commanding at the front to take over logistics, and essentially logistics for the entire Ukrainian theater. And he now has a unified command structure under him, which allows him to reach back anywhere inside Russia to bring forward whatever is required to sustain the accelerated pace of offensive operations. Now, I don't think that major offensive operation has yet really gotten off the ground. We see it in the strikes, but I think we're going to see that now followed up on the ground. That's not an insignificant development. Somebody said, well, why would he do that? And I said, during World War II, this was September of 1944, Bradley visited with Patton in the Third Army. Remember, Bradley was the Army Group commander. And he asked Patton, he said, I've got a full colonel, fresh out of regimental command of an infantry regiment, great combat record, very successful commander. If I gave him to you, what would you do with him? And Patton said, I'd put him in charge of logistics. And Bradley said, what? You don't want him in action? He said, no, I need someone in logistics, a ramrod, someone who will drive that train. I'm not getting everything I need fast enough. We've got to get a combat soldier back there, take it over and make it work. I think that's what we're seeing in Russia. We've also had some changes in the Center Army group, the Center Army in central Ukraine. It indicates that these axes, operational axes I've been talking about, I think they are developing. And we'll see where it goes. But it looks like what Ukraine experienced recently, as you point out, when it has virtually no air and missile defense, is going to happen on the ground as well.
And, you know, what's also happening even before we get to the ground, I will look at that in a second. But what do you make of the actions of Zelensky? Because on the one hand, he's talking about, I want this over by the end of the year by putting pressure on Ukraine, by putting pressure on Russia. And of course, he got another sanctions package from European Union, and he's trying to get one on the heels of Lindsey Graham's death. They're trying to use that to get something through that hasn't finished all the way, but they're trying to do that. And then at the same time, they're doing stuff like this. Here in just the last few days, they have assassinated the son-in-law of the Russian Aerospace Force chief, was killed in a Moscow blast. An FPV drone.
Hello, Dan, I lost you.
Having previously assassinated Russian generals from, in Moscow, et cetera. Are these kinds of actions going to actually help Ukraine?
No. And in fact, what do we know from experience? What happens when you remove the CEO of a major corporation? Well, you get another CEO. I mean, let's stop kidding ourselves. You know, Charles de Gaulle said the cemeteries are filled with indispensable men. He said that in response to a statement by a French politician, General de Gaulle, you are indispensable. And he said, it's ridiculous. No one is indispensable. So no, this is not going to help. It's not going to improve the situation in the least. It's probably going to make it much worse. The Russian population is already enraged. If it was left up to them, I think the entire Ukraine would be a smoking ruin. It's not what people think. So, the other thing is that Zelensky is now effectively become as what's the right word? Deceptive and deceitful as President Trump. Why would you listen to anything that Zelensky says? It's all nonsense. It makes no sense whatsoever.
And one of the things that he's also requesting, while talking about he wants to force Russia into a deal, one of the things he's asking for right now is, hey, how about we have an air ceasefire? And particularly, let's don't target each other's energy infrastructure, and then a halt along the current line of contact, which is almost verbatim what they asked for a couple of years ago, and the European Union was trying to help. But given the fact that this is coming at a time when they're running out of even air defense missiles of any sort, and there's graphic images you just saw a minute ago, what does this tell you about what Zelensky may be recognizing in terms of saying, hey, let's do something, anything to try to get these missiles stopped?
Well, I think he realizes he's in his last round with Mike Tyson. And if I were in his position and I was fighting Mike Tyson, I would offer Mike Tyson anything he wanted to get out of there. So I think that's what you're witnessing. I mean, the Russians don't take any of this seriously. They have no faith or confidence in anything that we say, and certainly don't believe anything that Zelensky says. Now, there was an article that came out recently. I don't know if you found it. It was I've seen it in Russian. It's also in English now, I think. It was an interview with Zaluzhny he was the former ambassador of Ukraine in London, and he was interviewed in Ukraine. And Zaluzhny was asked about NATO, and he chuckled. And he said, NATO is nothing. NATO is not prepared to fight a war with Russia. He said the notion that NATO can come in and rescue us is absurd. So I think the truth comes out. But if you're in the position that Zelensky is, your job isn't the truth. Your job is to keep the circus running to the bitter end as long as you possibly can, to maintain the facade. That's what you're watching.
You know, it's interesting. I don't have the clip handy here, but I saw earlier this morning from Sky News, Sean Bell was talking about some of the stuff about the interceptor missiles and the dearth of them, how long it takes to make them, and how it's going to be too long to affect the current war here to help them out, et cetera. And then he made a really interesting observation at the end where he said, hey, by the way, we don't even have enough in Europe and the UK. We have virtually no air defense. I couldn't believe he actually said that. He said, we have virtually none. So we can't get into a war with Russia because can you imagine if we have this kind of incoming missiles like what you saw with Ukraine and Kiev, it would be the same in our own cities. Do you think that reality is getting through to these warlusters?
No, because I think their view is that we can come out of it quickly, that we can mobilize industry and do whatever we need to do. And I think they don't believe that anyone would dare challenge us. And of course, they're wrong. Now, you do have some general officers, retired ones like Wes Clark, who've said if we lose in Iran, that's the end of our so-called military hegemony, global military hegemony. Well, he's right, except that global military hegemony is gone anyway. Now, the other point that he was making by implication is that if we fail in this theater to be successful militarily, that others will challenge us. I don't think very many people are interested in going to war with us under any circumstances. I just can't find any evidence for it. But I will say this, the longer this goes on, Dan, the worse we look. We don't look very strong. Remember Boris Johnson, who flew in to see Zelensky? This is back in 2022 in April, when there was a so-called agreement reached that would have ended this conflict and on terms infinitely better than anything that could be gotten today. And he was told, you have all of NATO behind you in the United States, the greatest military industrial powers in the world. You can't lose. Well, he's lost.
Yeah. If only we could roll that back and take that deal today would be pretty amazing. Listen, in the last few minutes I got here, I don't want you to get away before we talk about something else that's been in the news here lately, something that you've been interested in for a while, and that is in the dysfunction of the current two-party system. We've talked about it a lot. Last night, Tucker Carlson also talked about it, and he had it along about an hour and a half long show where he gave you the 10-point plan basically for the creation of a new party, because he says here in this, this is actually from MTG, she says the two parties give us the same result no matter who's in charge: more debt, more foreign wars, more unaffordable living. No matter how hard you work, the two parties are total failures. And then Tucker Carlson kind of laid out a vision for where he thinks a new party should go. But there is no party at the moment, but he's saying there needs to be one. Where do you stand on that?
Well, obviously, you and I have talked about this before. I've been an advocate for a new party for a very long time. I think on that tweet that you just showed, Tucker's comment in there was very, very accurate at the bottom, where he said, the system has collapsed into paralysis and looting. I think that's what you're seeing. Looting, number one. When I talked about a culture of manipulation in the White House in order to enrich people, it's really corruption and looting. It's not just Republicans. It's everybody that can be involved in it is involved in it. Everybody was talking about Nancy Pelosi and the insider trading involved in her life, and how people show up, with a few $100,000 and walk out with millions. This is epidemic now. Will another party rise up and solve it? It certainly would be helpful, but I think it's another question of leadership. Who's on the bench? Go back to 1968 and look at the very serious conditions in our society at that point. Ultimately, the result was Richard Nixon, whom the left loves to hate. But Nixon was elected because he was tough, intelligent, and people had confidence that he would pull the country together and get the job done. He made a profound error with the Watergate nonsense. But if you look at his record while he was there, he did it. He did succeed. He was a very intelligent man, and he was ruthless and tough. He wasn't particularly likable, but he was the sort of personality people were willing to vote into office because they needed someone to get us out of what we were in. That was the Vietnam War and all the domestic problems. So fast forward into the present, we could spend the next hour talking about all the problems we have at home. And where are you going to get someone who stands up and says, forget all this stuff overseas? Doesn't matter. We're bringing the forces home. We have to focus here. We have some tough issues that we must address, however distasteful they may be. I don't think the American people are there yet, but they'll get there. And when they get there, that third party will be relevant. Right now, the third party is a headless monster.
And what do you think that even in that time, because I agree that the conditions are coming that have historically resulted in the rise of other parties, not just in our country, but in other countries throughout time even. And I think that it's clear to come, because I think we have baked in that we can't avoid it at this point. And like you said a minute ago with Scott Bessent, how he's trying to put out little fires here and there to do something to help out in the next couple of months. But the longer term, you're just going to come to a point where you can't fix it. So when that comes, though, what do you think what could we expect, even with the rise of this kind of a leadership that you're talking about? And it exists somewhere, but it has not been manifest yet, because there are great people in our country. But what do you think that the two powers that be, and you can maybe even say the uniparty, what would they both do to try and suppress that? How hard would it be to rise even under those circumstances?
Well, it's always hard to rise to the heights required to do anything of importance, whether it's the military or the civilian sector. People who are really what they appear to be, as opposed to what we see today. We see a lot of people who are pretentious, who are presenting themselves as either men of the people or tough guys or something else, only to be bitterly disappointed. That's what's happened with the whole MAGA movement. Whoever is still in the MAGA movement that thinks that they've got somebody that's interested in them in the White House, of course, it probably needs their head examined. But on the Democratic side, you have a similar problem. You don't have a situation that is conducive to the emergence of anybody yet. Things change when things are bad, and they're bad, but they're not bad enough. Go back to our experience at Kasserine in February of 1943. That was a disaster. You had 11,000 German troops that attacked 30,000 Americans in a corps. There were 2,000 Americans killed or wounded. There were a number taken prisoner. The whole corps fell apart. And ultimately, Ernest Harman, Major General that gets very little attention today, intervened, pulled it all together. But we were fortunate because decisions were made at higher levels by the German commanders to call off the attack, when if they had pressed it, they could have driven all the way to the Mediterranean. The whole thing was a catastrophe. Well, that's how you got George Patton in command of the Corps. Nobody liked Patton. Patton was not a likable person. He was a nasty SOB. But he was competent. People knew that he was competent and that he would get the job done. Well, we haven't gotten that far yet. So we're not going to see anybody like that emerge until things get much worse. That's the best I can do for you.
Well, that unfortunately, I can't argue with any of that. It's just ironic and perverse that we have to get to that point before people can make a change. But with the people that we have in charge across the board in this country, I just don't see a way to
of, why does Iran put their country right around all of our U.S. military bases? You know that meme where it's like Iran and then all the U.S. military bases? How dare Iran put their country next to all of our U.S. military bases? That meme is outdated, old, and can no longer be used because, most of those U.S. military bases, right, they don't exist anymore, for better or worse. They literally don't exist. They're just ash and rubble. The bases in Afghanistan, gone. The bases in Syria, gone. Jordan, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, gone. I don't think you guys realize how bad it is for the United States, for the occupation forces of the United States in West Asia. Let's take a look at the main U.S. military bases in the Middle East and see just how bad it is. Because some people are under the impression that everything is fine, nothing to be concerned about. This is all some psyop that's being pushed by a concerned media, or the U.S. has a real and sincere capacity to do something, magnitudes larger than it failed to achieve after 23 years in Iraq, which is, I guess, the ground invasion and complete takeover of the Islamic Republic of Iran. For starters, something I'm sure you're all well aware of if you watch our channel quite frequently, Jordan is basically gone at this point. So we're going to start in Jordan. We're going to go base by base. The U.S. has evacuated the King Faisal Air Base in Jordan following Iranian strikes. Planes and helicopters can be seen departing from the base after F-15 hangars were destroyed. The Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan also has been evacuated. That's where we had the strike, which resulted in the unaliving of 3 U.S. military personnel just a couple weeks ago. And I want to show you this because we do have the satellite images to prove exactly what we're talking about here. We can also look at U.S. bases in Bahrain. The Financial Times has confirmed that the U.S. has withdrawn at least some of its presence from Kuwait and Bahrain after persistent Iranian attacks. Iran has intensified strikes against Kuwait and Bahrain in recent weeks, forcing Washington to reposition soldiers and airmen once relied on a necklace of vulnerable bases across the Gulf, further afield to Jordan, Israel, and beyond. So evacuating assets and personnel from Kuwait and Bahrain. And this was underreported, but I think it's worth sharing. As the United States came out and they said, we are going to reassess our military footprint in Kuwait due to heavy losses inflicted by Iran. We reported that extensively. It was in the Jerusalem Post. It was in Clash. It was in CNN, NBC. They all reported this, that the U.S. is reassessing its military posture in Kuwait and seriously considering withdrawing its troops and its assets in Kuwait. It's code word for saying that it got a little bit too hot to handle there. We saw this on social media. Lieutenant General of the U.S. Army, Leahy, met with Kuwait Armed Forces Chief of the General Staff, Lieutenant General Khalid al-Sharian, to discuss shared defense and reaffirm U.S. commitment to Kuwait. The meeting reinforced the enduring U.S.-Kuwait partnership and our shared commitment to regional security and stability. Now, for those of you who don't understand what all this jibber jabber means, this is the final farewell to the United States. This is thank you, sir, so much for being here. Thank you for getting all of our bases blown up. Thank you for, provoking Iran and having our energy infrastructure blown up and our power plants and our desalination plants blown up and our military academy blown up. And thank you, sir. Goodbye. That's what this is, a final send-off. So that's in Kuwait. But there's more. There's more. What about Bahrain? Well, prior to the Iran war starting in Bahrain, the U.S. had their coveted Navy 5th Fleet Command and Control headquarters stationed there. And only about 8,500 military personnel were at the U.S. Navy 5th Fleet Command and Control. Before the war even began, and in the initial days, the U.S. evacuated 1,500 military personnel, including their families and even their pets, to who knows where. Definitely not to elsewhere in Bahrain, because most of the people who were stationed at this base, they evacuated to hotels and nearby apartment buildings. That's actually where we got some of the footage from the strikes on the U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet while the war was ensuing. But 1,500 people actually left Bahrain in its entirety. And that was in the first few days. I can only imagine where the 8,500 in total are now. I'd imagine most of them are not in Bahrain. Bahrain got blown to smithereens in this war. Bahrain got absolutely vaporized. The U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. There's nothing left of this base. Okay. Well, what else do we have here? This is a look at the U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. Basically, everything is destroyed. The base, about 240 kilometers or 150 miles from Iran's southern coast, has served for decades as an anchor of U.S. naval power in the region. It can host any type of U.S. Navy ship and has played a key role in efforts to counter arms smuggling, mines, and attacks on tankers. Okay. It's the only base in the Middle East where families can live, functioning as a small city with restaurants, a school, and even a softball field. But no longer. After Iran strikes, the U.S. rethinks Gulf bases, in particular, possibly leaving the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. But as I said before, that's not all. Because just a few moments before we went live here, Iran launched more missiles at Bahrain. Iran basically does whatever they want now. There's no stopping them. Trump goes out and says he's talking to the Iranians. The Iranians say, oh, we'll just launch a missile at Bahrain. Oh, we'll launch a missile in the Strait of Hormuz and force a ship to turn around or sink. This is the first attack we've seen on Bahrain in nearly 2 weeks. And yeah, that kind of makes sense because I don't think that there's much left of Bahrain at this point. It's a small country, big military base, and a lot of open targets because most of the people evacuated in the opening weeks of this war. We've also seen tons of evacuations from Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia and the Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE. Both were targeted heavily. Communications outposts, radars, tankers, hangars, whatever it may be, were all destroyed at both these bases, forcing the U.S. to evacuate whatever air assets it could out of the country. Here you have some of that right there. KC-135s evacuated from Saudi Arabia, from Prince Sultan Air Base. U.S. evacuates Al Udeid Air Base and Al Dhafra Air Bases. So that's Qatar and the UAE amid regional escalation. Now, Al Udeid is a very important air base for the United States. Before the war, it was the largest U.S. facility active in the region, and it was actually U.S. CENTCOM's forward headquarters. So as we go through all the bases here, and oh yeah, I forgot Iraq. Iraqi PMF forced the U.S. out of the Victoria base, which used to be the largest foreign military base that the U.S. had on the entire planet. And now the U.S. has evacuated their last Patriot batteries from Erbil, and they're about to withdraw all of their military personnel from Iraq on September 30th. If the U.S. has evacuated all of these bases, and they're getting hit left and right at all these bases, Iran is even striking the Al-Tanf secret air base of the United States in eastern Syria. What options does the U.S. have left? I just went through all the main bases for you. We went through the two main bases in Jordan. We went through the bases in Kuwait and Bahrain, and the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Qatar, and even Syria. And they're all getting blown up. They're all being evacuated. This is a nightmare for the United States. And we don't even know what Israel looks like because we don't get satellite images there. In fact, earlier today, Israeli Channel 14 published that the U.S. has secretly retreated all of its aircraft from frontline bases which surrounded Iran over the past several days. Most of the U.S. air assets, like tankers, are now at Israel's Ramon Airport. What options does the U.S. have left? That meme of, why does Iran put their country right around all of our U.S. military bases? You know that meme where it's like Iran and then all the U.S. military bases? How dare Iran put their country next to all of our U.S. military bases? That meme is outdated, old, and can no longer be used because, most of those U.S. military bases, right, they don't exist anymore, for better or worse. They literally don't exist. They're just ash and rubble. The bases in Afghanistan, gone. The bases in Syria, gone. Jordan, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, gone. That meme just doesn't exist anymore. So my question to all of you, the rhetorical one, how is the U.S. going to fight? The answer is they can't. Not in any meaningful way, not in a 2003 Iraq invasion sort of way. And they need something magnitudes larger than that to invade Iran. So I say they can't. Before you leave, I want to say thank you.
Kofi, follow me.